You're late, my mother exclaimed as she pulled her bag behind her and went out onto the porch. I looked at my dashboard's clock. The time was 6:02 a.m. I forced a grin as I said, 2 minutes late, Mom. My sister Lauren was coming out of the house with her own suitcase in tow as I stepped out of the van to assist with the luggage. My grin went cold. I asked, attempting to sound steady, "What's going on?" My mother turned to face me, her face too happy for the occasion. "Oh, Violet, we decided Lauren should come instead of you. She's been so stressed lately, and she really needs this trip." My chest constricted. "Instead of me? Mom, I've been planning this for years. I paid for everything." She dismissively waved her hand as though I had just brought up a pointless detail. "And we're grateful, sweetheart, but you're always working so hard. You can take another trip later. Lauren needs this right now." Lauren lacked even the grace to appear guilty. She simply shifted her weight onto one hip and grinned. She added, "Thanks for understanding, sis," in a tone that was brimming with phony appreciation. My heart was racing as I gazed at the two of them. After a time, my dad handed me his suitcase and shuffled out, avoiding eye contact. I responded, "This is unbelievable," in a trembling voice. This was supposed to be our trip, something for me to share with you. "Well, it still is," my mother said with a grin. "Just with Lauren instead. Don't make this a big deal, Violet. Your sister really needs a break. I'm Violet, and I've been working extra hours and saving every cent for a trip my parents will never forget for the past 2 years. I organized every aspect, including the final dinner reservation, flights, upscale lodging, and guided tours. But as I saw my sister climb into the back seat of my car in my parents' driveway, I came to the realization that no matter how hard I tried, it didn't matter. This was something I had been dreading for years. Lauren would always come first in their eyes. Biting back the scathing remark that was on the tip of my tongue, I tightened my jaw. I opened the trunk instead, forcing a strained smile. "Let's get going then," I remarked in a bland voice. Okay, if they decided to put her before me. They were welcome to accompany her, but I wasn't going to let them have any fun. With the exception of Lauren's constant conversation, the journey to the airport was oppressively quiet. "Oh my gosh, Mom, did you see that TikTok about Paris? I can't wait to go shopping there. Do you think we'll have time for that, or will the tours take up the whole day?" I forced myself not to speak as I glanced straight ahead, my hands tightening their grasp on the driving wheel. My mother laughed quietly. "Of course, we'll have time. We'll figure it out when we get there." I took a bite out of my cheek. They didn't even appear to realize that I was no longer a member of that "we" when they said, "when we get there." My father cleared his throat once. "Thank you for driving us, Violet. I know this probably feels unusual." I looked in the rearview mirror at him. He simply shuffled uneasily in his seat, perhaps wishing he hadn't said anything at all. "Unusual. That's an interesting way to put it, Dad." Lauren's voice was annoying as she leaned forward from the back seat. "You're not mad, right? I mean, this is really big of you letting me go. I could never have afforded this on my own." I made a tight smile and tightened my jaw. "Of course, Lauren. Enjoy the trip." My patience was ebbing by the time we arrived at the airport drop-off area. My mother hugged me while I assisted them in unloading their bags. "Thank you for understanding, sweetheart. This means a lot to us. And to Lauren." I gave a rigid nod. "Sure, Mom." Wheeling her bag toward the door, Lauren smiled. "Thanks, Violet. You're the best." My chest was constricted with hurt and rage as I watched them vanish inside the terminal. It was a blur on the way home. I repeatedly reenacted the exchange in my mind, with each statement having a deeper meaning than the one before. Lauren is really touched by this. "You're not angry, are you? You work so hard all the time." After parking in my driveway, I spent a few minutes sitting in the car and holding onto the steering wheel until my knuckles became white. Then, without thinking, I strode inside, took out my laptop, and signed into all of the travel accounts I had used to make the reservation. Reservations for a hotel? Canceled. Tours? Reimbursed. Upgrades on airlines? Not at all. The constriction in my chest began to loosen as I gazed at the confirmation emails that were accumulating in my inbox. Instead of me, they wanted to take Lauren? All right. However, they wouldn't be taking special excursions or lodging in five-star hotels on my dime. I felt a wave of satisfaction wash over me as I shut down my laptop. In Paris, they could explain themselves to the receptionists. I had had enough of being a doormat. When their plane touched down, the calls began. As I unpacked my suitcase, the one I had meticulously prepared for a trip that was no longer mine, my phone began to vibrate constantly. As I put my shoes back on the rack and hung up my clothes, I couldn't help but notice the irony. The incessant vibration of the humming permeated the entire area. I picked up the phone, looked at the screen, and sighed. It displayed a number of missed calls and texts along with my mom's name. I went through the messages after unlocking the phone. "What's going on, Violet? We are unable to check in at the hotel. There is no reservation. Give me a call now." "This isn't funny, Violet. Take care of this right away." Before I could stop myself, I let out a laugh. Make this right? After what they had done, they genuinely believed that I would intervene and save the day. Lauren was calling when the phone buzzed once more. She left me a voicemail after I let it ring. She screamed, "Violet, this is so petty," in an arrogant tone. "We're stuck here because of you. You need to call the hotel and fix it now." Without hearing the remainder, I rolled my eyes and erased the voicemail. I had been their fixer for years, taking up all the slack and smoothing over all the mistakes. No more. I finally made the decision to respond, if only to put an end to the flurry of calls. As soon as I picked up the phone, my mother's voice hit me like a tidal wave of rage. "Violet, what did you do? The hotel says the reservation was canceled and none of the tours are booked anymore." After listening to her tirade for a while, I simply responded, "I canceled them." After a lengthy moment of astonished silence, she growled, "Why would you do that?" "Oh, I don't know," I replied in a sarcastic tone. "Maybe because you decided to take Lauren on my trip. You're lucky I even drove you to the airport." She snarled, "We thought you'd understand." "Understand what?" I said, raising my voice. "That years of saving and planning didn't matter because Lauren needed a break? That my hard work meant nothing to you? Guess what, Mom? I don't understand, and I don't care to." Before she could answer, I hung up and threw my phone on the couch, turning it off. I felt as though I could breathe again in the blissful silence that followed. Okay, if they wanted to put Lauren first, however, they could manage the remainder of the journey without my assistance. There was only a day of silence. My phone was ringing with calls and messages once more by the next morning. I ignored them at first. I caught up on work and cleaned the house during the day, but by evening, my curiosity overcame me. I grabbed my phone and readied myself for the barrage of texts that would come in. From my mother. "You've gone too far, Violet. Your father is angry, and your sister is crying. None of the hotels you reserved are accessible to us." From Lauren. "You are behaving like a kid. Why you're making such a huge deal out of this is beyond me. Just get things fixed already." And lastly, from my father. "We must speak. This is incorrect." I shook my head and put the phone down. I had been the one making repairs and ensuring everyone was content for years. They were unsure of how to respond now that I had retreated. After pouring myself a cup of tea, I took a seat at the kitchen table and let my rage to stew. They have no right to expect me to tidy up their mess. How could they pretend that I was at fault? Minutes later, I took the next call and answered it. My mother yelled, "Violet," before I could respond. "This isn't funny anymore. We're stranded. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is?" I sipped my tea slowly. "Embarrassing? You think this is embarrassing? Try saving for years, planning every detail and then being told you're not even part of the trip you paid for. "Stop being so dramatic," she yelled. "Lauren needed this more than you." "And now she can figure it out," I confidently stated. "You made your decision, Mom. You wanted to take Lauren instead of me. Fine. But don't expect me to fund her vacation." "We are related," she growled. "We don't do this to each other." I laughed resentfully. Funny. I was just thinking the same thing. In the background, Lauren's voice could be heard complaining, "Mom, just hang up on her. She's being impossible." That was the last straw. I said, "Enjoy your trip," in a cold tone. "Oh, wait, you can't, because it's not your trip. It was mine, and now it's nobody's. Goodbye." Before she could answer, I hung up and shut off my phone once more. I experienced a strange mixture of relief and rage for the remainder of the evening. Relief that I had finally defended myself, yet anger that they had placed me in this predicament. The days that followed were gloriously peaceful. I was finally able to concentrate straight without being distracted by guilt trips and accusations when I turned off my phone. I sipped coffee on my back porch in the mornings and relished the peace I had long sought. My afternoons were spent working and finishing small tasks that I had been putting off, which served as a reminder of my abilities when I wasn't constrained by their never-ending demands. My curiosity overcame me by the third day. There were more than a dozen voicemails waiting for me when I turned my phone back on. My mother gave me the first several, getting more and more crazy with each one. "You must give me a call back immediately, Violet. This has gotten out of hand. It's unbelievable that you're doing this. We are humiliated by you. How could you treat us like this when we are your parents?" Lauren's communications then arrived, replete with the arrogant tone she had usually employed. "This is quite trivial, even for you. Everything is being ruined by you. Violet, just repair it." Lastly, my dad's voice, which is quieter but just as sharp. "I don't know what happened to you, Violet. Give us a call back so we can resolve this." After a moment of hesitation, I listened to my mother's lengthy final message. This time, she spoke in a softer tone that was tinged with weariness and frustration. "We're back at the airport now, Violet," she said. "I hope you are pleased with yourself, but the trip is spoiled. Your father and I are heartbroken, as is your sister. Well, disappointed isn't even close to describing it. When you're ready to speak, give us a call." Without responding, I erased the voicemails. To be honest, I wasn't prepared to speak and wasn't sure if I ever would be. This was not an isolated error. It was the result of years of them prioritizing Lauren and hoping I would grin in response. As the hours went by, I started thinking back on all the occasions I had been disregarded or ignored. Every holiday where arrangements were determined by Lauren's whims. My achievements were always viewed as afterthoughts at family get-togethers. Although the Fishers had been developing for years, this trip had been the tipping point. Grace dropped by unexpectedly that night with 2 cups of coffee and a curious expression on her face. After placing the coffee on the table, she remarked, "I heard about what happened. Your mom called me yesterday." She had, of course. When my mother attempted to coerce me into complying, she had always been skilled at finding allies. I sipped and said, "And?" A wicked smile crept onto Grace's face as she shrugged. "I told her you were probably busy and would get back to her when you were ready." I shook my head and laughed. "You're the best." Her tone abruptly became serious as she stated, "No, you're the best. Because you finally stood up for yourself. I know how hard that is, Violet. Don't let them drag you back down." Long after she was gone, her words remained with me. Grace was correct. I had put in too much effort to please individuals who never seemed to appreciate what I had done. It was time to permanently end that cycle. I experienced an odd feeling of clarity by the time the weekend arrived. Freedom, which I hadn't experienced in years, joined the rage that was still bubbling beneath the surface. Freedom from their never-ending demands, freedom from fixing things for the family, freedom to live my life as I see fit. However, the silence was short-lived, as anticipated. When I did receive a call, I chose to answer it on a Sunday afternoon. My dad did it this time. "Your mom wanted me to call because she thinks you'll listen to me," he said, his voice heaving with fatigue. "Go on," I murmured as I reclined in my seat. He sighed. "Look, this has all gotten out of hand. Your mom's upset, Lauren's furious, and, well, it's just a mess. But you're better than this." I tensed up as his comments sparked a new round of rage. "Better than what, Dad? Standing up for myself? Refusing to let you walk all over me again?" The words, "That's not what I meant," he blurted out. "It's just, you've always been the reasonable one, the one who keeps everything together. This isn't like you." I let out a brief, sour laugh. "You're right. It's not like me. Because I'm not bending over backward to clean up your mess." When he hesitated, I briefly believed he would finally understand my point of view. Then he responded, "You're punishing the whole family over one decision. Is that really fair?" "Fair?" I asked again, raising my voice. "You want to talk about fair? Was it fair when you and Mom decided I wasn't important enough to be part of the trip I planned? Was it fair when you replaced me with Lauren, like I didn't matter?" He added, "That's not what we were trying to do," in a defensive tone. "We just thought Lauren needed it more." I yelled, "Of course you did. You always think she needs more attention, more support, more of everything. And I'm always the one expected to sacrifice for her. Not anymore." It was so quiet on the other end of the telephone. "I don't know what you want me to say," he finally responded. "I don't need you to say anything," I said in a firm voice. "I just need you to understand that I'm done being the afterthought. From now on, I come first. Goodbye, Dad." With shaking hands, I hung up and put the phone down. I allowed myself to feel everything for the remainder of the day, including relief, sadness, and rage. Although it wasn't simple, it felt like a fresh beginning. I no longer served as the family's fixer. I wasn't going to be either. I was waiting for my parents and Lauren at their place when they eventually came back. As I saw their taxi arrive, I parked in their driveway, drinking coffee and feeling remarkably at ease. Their expressions were a mixture of frustration and tiredness as they left, pulling their bags with them. It was Lauren who spoke first. "Well, I hope you're happy, Violet." I remained sitting on the porch swing and arched an eyebrow. "Happy about what?" my mother yelled. "Our trip was a disaster," and waved her hand as though dismissing the entire situation. "We spent the entire week staying in dingy hotels and eating terrible food because we couldn't afford anything decent. And don't get me started on the tours." Crossing her arms, Lauren added her voice. "Oh, wait. There weren't any. Do you know how embarrassing it was to show up and be told there was no reservation?" After letting their grievances pass, I took another sip of coffee and said, "Sounds rough," in a calm manner. "But you wanted to take Lauren, remember? I'm sure you all had some great bonding time." "That's not the point," my mother retorted, raising her voice. "You knew we couldn't afford all the things you'd planned. You set us up to fail." "No, Mom. I didn't set you up for anything. I planned a trip for the three of us. Something special I'd been saving for years. You're the ones who decided to cut me out at the last minute," I said, as I got up and placed my cup on the tiny table beside me. When my father did speak, it was in a lower but no less accusing tone. "You didn't have to cancel everything, Violet. That was extreme." With my arms folded, I questioned, "Was it? Why should I have paid for a trip I wasn't even invited to? If Lauren needed it so badly, you should have planned it yourselves. You're lucky I didn't cancel the return flight." Lauren rolled her eyes. "You're so dramatic. It's just money, Violet." And you're so entitled, I retorted, at last losing patience. Do you have any idea how much work and sacrifice went into planning that trip? Or do you just assume things magically appear for you because someone else takes care of it? For a time, they stood stunned into silence. I've spent years being the responsible one, I added, maintaining a hard yet steady tone. The one who fixes things, plans things, makes sure everything runs smoothly, and you've spent just as long taking it all for granted. My mother began to say, "That's not fair," but I interrupted her by raising a hand. "No, Mom. What's not fair is how you treated me. You chose Lauren over me, like always. So I chose to stop being your doormat. You didn't want me on the trip? Fine. But you don't get to enjoy the benefits of my hard work without me." I turned to go after grabbing my luggage from the porch swing. "I'm glad you're back safely, but don't expect things to go back to the way they were. I'm done." They called after me as I was making my way to my car, their words a mixture of shame and rage. However, I didn't turn around. It seemed odd, peaceful to drive home from my folks' house. Every visit had left me emotionally spent for years. However, I felt lighter this time. I had finally expressed all I had been suppressing, and for once, I wasn't concerned about how they would respond. Upon returning home, I brewed a cup of tea and sat on the couch, mentally reliving the altercation. They had been so confident that I would give in, as I always do. However, seeing their astonished expressions as I left served as a reminder of how much I had evolved. They could feel offended, ashamed, or furious. It was no longer relevant. I was done trying to live up to their standards. Grace called me the following day. She skipped over the small talk and asked, "How'd it go?" I leaned back against the kitchen counter and chuckled. "Exactly like you'd imagine. They're furious, Lauren's pouting, and Mom is probably trying to figure out how to guilt me back into line." Grace gave a little snort. "Let her try. You've got a backbone now, and I'm here to make sure it stays in place." I smiled, appreciating her steadfast assistance. "Thanks, Grace. I mean it. You've been my rock through all of this," she said. "Anytime," as her tone grew softer. "So, what's next for you now that you're not playing family fixer anymore?" I had been thinking about that question ever since the altercation. What came next? I had been putting a lot of effort into attempting to win my family's approval and please them for years. The options felt limitless and a little scary now that I had released that load. "I don't know yet," I said, "but I feel like I get to decide. Not them, not anyone else, just me." I heard Grace say, "Sounds like the start of something amazing," and her smile was audible. I began making minor adjustments over the course of the following several weeks, each of which felt significant in its own right. I redecorated my living room, replacing my parents' hand-me-down furniture with items that felt like my. On the weekends, I explored the parks and cafes in the area, which I had always wanted to do but had never had time for. I then began journaling, putting down my ideas and dreams without considering what other people would think. I felt as though I was regaining a piece of myself with every little step I took. I accessed the spreadsheet I had used to arrange the trip one evening when I sat down with my laptop. I didn't feel any remorse as the canceled bookings stared back at me. Rather, I experienced a wave of resolve. I wasn't going to waste the money that had been intended for a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I closed the spreadsheet and typed solo travel ideas in a new tab of my browser. I made plans to travel alone to Italy a few weeks after my parents got back. It wasn't about making a point anymore, and it wasn't the same schedule I had prepared for them. This was my opportunity to finally prioritize myself and celebrate my independence. The instant I landed in Rome, I felt a burst of excitement and trepidation. Even though I had never traveled alone before, I knew I had made the proper choice as soon as I left the airport and entered the busy metropolis. I ate at quaint, tiny cafes, marveled at ancient ruins, and spent my days exploring cobblestone streets. There was only me and the flexibility to do as I pleased, with no timetable or other people to think about. I took out the journal I had brought one afternoon as I sat on the Spanish steps enjoying a gelato. I had been writing about my goals for years, but they were usually entwined with making other people happy. As I was writing, the emphasis changed. Pick up a new tongue. Launch a tiny company. Visit a minimum of 5 other nations. As the list expanded, each objective reflected the life I wished to lead rather than the one that had been expected of me. I ate dinner at a little family-run restaurant with a view of the Arno River on my final night in Florence. I experienced a profound sense of calm as I watched the sunset tint the sky in shades of pink and orange. This trip had been a turning point, not merely a holiday. After spending so much of my life attempting to win my family's approval, I came to the crucial realization that I didn't require it while I was thousands of miles away. I was sufficient in my current state. My parents made another attempt to contact me after I got home, using more tactful language and well-crafted texts. One of my mom's texts said, "I hope you had a good trip. Perhaps we can all speak soon." After a moment of staring at the message, I put my phone down. It was acceptable that I wasn't prepared to respond. It would be on my terms this time. I felt proud as I put trinkets on my shelf and unloaded my suitcase. It was something I had done for myself, something I had done without apology. My mother called me a week after I got back from my vacation. I responded this time. "Hi, Violet," she said in an unusually gentle voice. "How was your trip?" "It was amazing," I answered in a bland tone. She added, "That's good to hear," pausing as though she was trying to find the proper words. "We've been thinking a lot about what happened. Maybe we handled things poorly." Although I was taken aback by the admission, I wasn't yet prepared to forgive her. "Poorly? You replaced me on a trip I planned and paid for without even asking. Poorly is an understatement." "I know," she muttered. "Your dad and we didn't realize how much it would hurt you." I said, "And Lauren? Does she feel bad too? Or is she still blaming me for ruining her vacation?" "She's upset," my mother acknowledged. "But I think she knows she could have handled things better." I leaned on the counter and sighed. "Mom, this wasn't just about the trip. It's about years of putting her first and expecting me to pick up the slack. I'm not doing it anymore." "I understand," she finally said. "We're going to try to do better. We don't want to lose you." I had learned enough to not let guilt control my decisions, even if her remarks struck a deep chord with me. "I'm glad to hear that," I replied. "But it's going to take more than words to fix this. I need to see real effort, not just apologies." "You will," she assured him. "We'll give you the space you need, but I hope you'll let us back in someday." I experienced a range of feelings following the call, including cynicism about whether they would truly change, and satisfaction that they were finally admitting their actions. However, I came to a crucial realization that night when I sat down with my journal. I had no control over whether things changed or not. In the months that followed, I maintained my boundaries. I didn't make an effort to resolve disputes or make amends, but I did answer their calls and texts when I felt like it. Rather, I concentrated on creating the life I desired. I enrolled in a photography course because I'd always wanted to do it, but had never had the time or energy. I even started organizing my next solo trip after joining a local hiking organization. I felt like I was taking back a piece of myself with every stride. I became aware of how far I had come one day while enjoying a sunset while sitting on my veranda. I wasn't the type to go out of my way for folks who didn't value me. I was a self-respecting individual who established limits and didn't hesitate to defend her rights. I felt completely free for the first time in years.